Hopefully, everyone can hear me. I want to welcome you all to this final open air conversation that's connected to the current exhibition on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center, Visual Vanguard. I'm joined today by two fantastic artists. I want to just get right into the conversation, as I know everyone here is just anxious to hear from both of them. Antoine Williams' mixed media work investigates his cultural identity by exploring power, fear, and the perception of signs within society. Heavily influenced by science fiction and his rural, working class upbringing in Red Springs, North Carolina, Antoine has created his own mythology about the complexities of contemporary Black life. He received his BFA from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and his MFA from UNC Chapel Hill. He helped to start the God City Art Collective in Charlotte and has exhibited in a number of places, including the Michigan State University, Columbia Museum of Art, 21C Museum, as well as many other venues. He is a recipient of the 2017 Joan Mitchell Award for Painters and Sculptors and is currently an assistant professor of art at Guilford College. I want to welcome Antoine Williams. How are you today?
I'm good. Dexter, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So we're also joined by an artist and curator in his own right, David Wilson. David Wilson was born and raised in West Virginia and currently resides in North Carolina. Throughout his early training, Wilson maintained sufficient artistic focus to investigate African-American artists of the past. At Hampton University, he was afforded the valuable opportunity to study under prolific artist and muralist John Biggers, where he discovered a deeper connection to his rich Black art heritage and began developing a new way of expressing his experiences as a Black artist. Wilson has exhibited at notable galleries and venues in Atlanta, New York City, and Washington, D.C. His crowning achievement is Divergent Threads, Lucent Memories, a 500 square foot glass mural for the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture in Charlotte. Wilson's work rests in the notable private and celebrity collections of actors such as Hill Harper, Ruby Dee, Debbie Allen, as well as sports icons Baron Davis and Stuart Scott. Welcome, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so let's hope that the Zoom gods bless us today and we don't have any crazy Wi-Fi outages or anything like that. I've
Yes.
been crossing my fingers. I'm kind of here with it's like glue and duct tape. I'm at a MacGyver moment right now because my Wi-Fi went out and I'm using like my phone as a hotspot and also some jerry rig things. So, let's see if it holds up for the hour.
Resourceful.
Uh, so listen, I want to jump right into what I believe to be, the sort of like most urgent thing is that Visual Vanguard, the exhibition you co-curated, still on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center, David. And I'd just love to give you a moment to just talk briefly about that exhibition. It closes in a week. You also have a collaborator who worked with you on curating that show. So for the folks that don't know what Visual Vanguard is, maybe you can talk about it for a moment.
Yeah, thank you. Visual Vanguard is my co-creators, Stephen Hayes, who some of you, if you've been following the open air conversations throughout the course of this exhibition, you may have seen him in dialogue with Dexter and other artists that are participating in the show. But yeah, it's our first undertaking as curators. Of course, as fine artists, we've curated our own shows. But when we were approached by David Taylor, CEO of the Gantt, to take this undertaking, we wanted to make it organic, and he asked us to like pull from our personal resources of artists that we had connections with and respected and had an understanding of where they were going and kind of charting their direction over the next 3 to 5 years. And Antoine, our guest today, along with the other artists in the show, all represent that. If they're not someone we personally know, they might be someone that's affiliated with an artist that we personally know and got a tip off to take a look at their work. So we're really proud of what we came up with. We think it's a accurate and pretty authentic reflection of contemporary Black artists here working in the Carolinas, and have been very happy with the success and the feedback the community has given the Gantt. And we're looking forward to closing out strong with the final week.
No, that's great. That's great. And Antoine, so glad to have you here because I think that to David's point, it's great when there's a platform for artists from different parts of the country to have their work highlighted. And everything isn't, just about the Northeast and about LA and about Chicago. There's fantastic work being made everywhere. I always tell people that whenever they start talking about, like oversaturation of different cities, I'm like, yeah, because you're not looking. There's great work everywhere if you look. So let's talk about your work, Antoine, your career. Like what brought you to being a visual artist? Talk a little bit about your journey.
Oh wow, yeah. So what brought me to being a visual artist? Yeah, I'm from Red Springs. It's a small rural town in southeastern North Carolina. I don't know, like I think I've always been an artist. But I was always an observant kid. And there's this thing that happens. I think it happens with a lot of Black people or even marginalized people where you're seeing one thing, but then you're being told something else. And I remember from very young, seeing images of Black folks perceived in ways that I'm like, yeah, that's not me, that's not my cousins, that's not fam. And so I think for me, it's been sort of this, like growing up, I was a teenager in the 90s. So hearing all these like really negative stereotypes or just ideals about Black folks, I think for me, from a kid, I think I became sort of this detective trying to figure out like what's up with these perspectives, why are people saying these things. Like I've been constantly like looking at history, pulling from pop culture, anything that I'm interested in, to sort of constantly investigate Blackness and investigate who we are. And like I still do that, right? So and no matter like where I'm at, like at any point in life, I'm constantly sort of like I feel like I'm constantly exploring and investigating, but I do it through objects. I do it through making and materiality. But yeah, so that lifelong quest to sort of like not just investigate Blackness, but celebrate it as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And David, one curator to another. What was it about Antoine's work that spoke to you?
That's a great question. Being a mixed media artist on my fine art side as well, there's kind of three aspects to me: public artist, the fine artist, and then kind of the consulting project management side. But when I looked at Antoine's portfolio, and Stephen and Anton have a nice connection, so I became, first aware of Antoine's work through Stephen. Having that mixed media background and seeing the way he was able to treat facade spaces or flat surfaces, but still give it some type of three-dimensionality and have things kind of coming out you off the wall, found objects, using this really kind of technical, grungy aspect to doing these large illustrations, but then have, balled up material or cloth, connected to it to make this whole different like idea of what a shape can be. Like, because you're looking at the feet, you're clearly making out it's a human torso, but then it turns into this, hodgepodge gumbo of, belts and things twisted and turning. And I just thought that was amazing. It was not a way I've ever thought of like treating the space as a mixed media artist or a collage artist. So once I saw that, I was like, yeah, I love this. We got to have Antoine in the show.
I mean, I think that for the folks that are here who aren't that familiar with Antoine's work, it would be great if we could show some visuals. And I'll let I'll let the team get this slideshow started. But in the meantime, Antoine, while that's getting started, I want to ask you a question about something that really stood out to me in your bio, and that is this influence of science fiction on your work. So
Right.
before we go deep into these slide images, I'd love for you to talk for a moment about that influence. Like, where does science fiction fit into your process as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, science fiction is like I think I've always been interested in things that don't quite fit into status quo. And there's so much in science fiction that does that, where you're sort of looking at the uncanny, but also in terms of sort of Black experience. So many themes in science fiction relate to that in terms of technology, the past, the future, things of that sort, and the bizarre. And I feel that sort of white supremacy and racism and all that, like living through that, it's bizarre, right? Just as like a person trying to live your life, but then there's this onslaught of all these isms. It's just an absurdist, bizarre thing. And I feel for me, it's just as bizarre as, you know, in a good way, like bizarre as something that like Octavia Butler writes, right? And so I would always go to those narratives and those stories. One, sort of as a metaphor for what we're going through, but also in terms of, well, what are realities and futures that we can think about, and you know, how can we bring this fiction back to our reality to hopefully sort of combat these things we have to deal with. Also, I'm just a big nerd, Dexter, and I don't know, I do nerd stuff, and you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think so many of us are, you know, are secretly nerds. But you know, I own it. I'll just live up to it. You know, I'll own it. So we have an image on screen now that we'd love to kind of get some insight into your work.
Yeah. So last year, no, 2020 was a wild year, and I look back and I realized I made a lot of
No,
work.
you're kidding.
Yeah. What happened? Yeah, but no, I made a lot of work, and a lot of the work was sort of responding to what was going on. And so this is a piece I did for Sika, commission piece. It's called A Moment of Rest while convincing monsters that I'm human. And actually, I was going to do another installation, but once the uprisings around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and he saw every major city have a a protest. At the beginning of all that, I was already exhausted because I'm like, it's great to see this movement, but I'm like, we're having a worldwide movement for the bare minimum, just for like the law to work. And I'm like, we can't keep doing like that. That's not sustainable. And I just felt this exhaustion. And so it was just me thinking about sort of taking ownership of my humanity and saying, I'm going to step out for a sec because I need to collect who I am. I need to collect myself. And I feel like that is actually a radical act as well for us to sort of kind of claim our humanity and stuff. But yeah, that's what I was thinking with this wheat paste piece. It's the biggest one I've ever done. It's like 15 feet. So that was
Yes,
fun.
it's interesting you should say that, you know, like claiming your humanity as a radical act, or even taking the time to just pause and think. There are a few other artists that I've had similar conversations with about this idea that, we deal with so just existing, right? You forget about race for a moment. Just being a human being it's challenging enough, right?
Mhm.
Then you have this layer of race and politics on top of that, right? And if you don't allow yourself space for thinking and healing, you just end up spending all your time in survival mode. Like your adrenaline's always up, your defenses are always up, and that's not healthy. And it leads to all sorts of other problems that we know, psychological and physical problems
Right.
that destroy us. And so I think that you're absolutely right. It is a radical act to pause. It's also a radical act to create, but to create what you want to create and not what's being dictated to you. And, David, if you want to chime in on that, please feel free.
No, I love it. I think that's a great observation. And I think it's also radical in the sense that it doesn't put us in a point to where we have to react as a culture and a race of people the way that we're expected to, right? Like, I think a lot of times an incident like Floyd or Breonna Taylor happens and the expected result is riots in the streets, protest. But if we were to pause and just be silent and not have any collective response to it, what message does that send to the powers that be, right? Does that put them on kind of pause and be like, wait a minute, they're not doing what we expected them to do? So I kind of like how he took that approach, Antoine's approach, to saying, you know what, I just need to kind of, detach from it for a moment, explore my humanity, go into my own inner safe space, and then see what comes out of that as a narrative, from that moment. So his one individual radical act, I think, would be great for us to examine how to do collectively on a large scale.
Yeah. I have more. I have more I'd like to say on that, but just in the interest of time, we'll move to the next image. And when we're done with the slides, we can jump back into this aspect of the conversation because I think there's much more that we can unpack there.
Mhm.
So let's advance to the next slide. And Antoine, maybe you can talk a little bit about the way you make these works. I think that would also be really great.
Yeah. So they start out as, so these are wheat paste installations. This is actually a wheat paste and sound installation. Yeah, so the way they're made is essentially they start out as drawings, and they start out as drawings, and I'm just pretty much pulling from street art. I go to Kinko's and I have to, take a photo of the drawing, then make a really large copy of it, and have to do it in panels because I think this piece was like 27 feet. And I had to do it in panels, print it out in panels, and then just wheat paste it up and stick it together. It's a fairly simple process. That's one reason I enjoy it, because it's very accessible to do that. But this piece in particular is called Othered Sons. I did a residency at Duke, and it's actually Robin B.G. Kelly is someone I really love his work. And from his book, Freedom Dreams, he has this quote that the history of Black people is the history of movement, real or imagined. And just thinking about, like, constantly we are moving, whether it's the transatlantic slave trade, the Great Migration, or science fiction, right? Afrofuturism, right? Whether it's creative movement as well. Like, we've been constantly moving as a culture. And I wanted a piece that references that. And so you have this wheat paste, but so it's this, I think it's called the rubrics, there's the structure, and inside there are speakers. And so emanating out is what I call audio collage, but a 15-minute sound piece of various collected sounds that sort of give this quasi narrative of just movement, Black folks through sort of like capitalism, just everyday being a human being, going to other worlds, all this and that. And so just thinking about movement as just that act of being for Black folks.
And with the sound, was that something you did in collaboration with a musician? How did the sound component of this come to be?
No, I just love trying out new media. I've always loved, I love when I walk through grass, the sound that makes. I love the sound that paper bags make. And so I've always been interested in sound. And earlier that year, I had an opportunity to do an audio piece for another project that I was doing. And so I just started playing around with sounds. And I realized that through the program I was using, that I could layer the sounds. And so I was like, wait, this is like collage. I do collage. And so I started just layering sounds and just playing around with that. And so it's something that I've been doing for like the past maybe year and a half or so, that I'm really interested in. But it's just another medium that I can sort of bring into what I'm already doing.
That's fantastic. Let's advance to the next image. And David, in our sort of like preview to this conversation, I know you were asking Antoine some questions about his process and some of the experimentation around making work. And maybe this piece here is connected to what some of the questions you were asking him. So I'm gonna see if you, David, have a question you'd like to ask Antoine about this work.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, because that was another key component to Stephen and I's kind of curating the show. We wanted to catch artists where they were in their career, right? So if you were in a space that, even though you're teaching, like Antoine is, serves as a full-time professor, but he's also a practicing professional artist. We wanted to catch, artists where they were, like in their studio, and like new materials or new approaches to a particular medium, or working larger or maybe working smaller from a grander scale. So just looking at this piece, is that a tiny piece, Antoine, in scale to what's on show currently at the Gantt Visual Vanguard? Is it, because it looks like it's similar use of maybe gel medium, looks like some things are kind of stretched, and you've got a lot of texture built in there. It looks like the actual colors kind of fused in with the medium that's almost kind of twisted and turned around. It looks like a crumpled piece of plastic or metal or something. Like, yeah, tell me about that. Like, is that inspiration for what we're currently looking at in Visual Vanguard or what?
Yeah, actually it's all, so there's, yeah, so okay, I mentioned I do collage, and a lot of the collage work I do, I sand down. And so the work that's in Visual Vanguard, I started in 2018, where I wanted to, so I'm thinking of sanding as sort of peeling back layers. And I'm like, okay, so what does that look like to wear that in skin? And and I started playing around. It's like, how can I sort of just take the sanded part out from sort of this traditional, like conventional square, like, canvas or paper. So doing that, I started playing around with gel medium and paint. And so a whole summer just playing around with that. And so that's where we get those pieces in Visual Vanguard, is these gel medium skins. And so I mix it with paint. So it's gel medium paint. I mix it, pour it out on plastic sheeting, let it dry. Once it dries, you can peel it up in its skin. So you can go back into it and paint on it, or whatever you want. So those pieces in the exhibition are flat. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But I wanted to, and they represent bodies. They're supposed to be portraits. But I'm like, okay, I want something to be a little more tactile. I want it to be a little more bodily. And so I started playing with chicken wire and plaster. And then to get interesting shapes. And then I started wrapping these around. But an interesting thing that happened is that I started to get all of these wrinkles. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And so the pieces already have paint in them. And so I started using rust. And so I would get metal and artificially rust the metal and use vinegar and sort of almost do a wash of vinegar over top. I'm sorry, of rust over top. But yeah, these are just more so just playing with the body, but also looking at sort of this liminal space in which a lot of us sort of exist. Like in 2020, you had the horribleness of the pandemic and the uprisings, but we also got verses, which is amazing. And it's like Black culture for the win. Like we came through with verses, like
that's right.
so amazing. And it's still going. And it's like that's sort of like that Black experience. Like you're in this space where it's these really, really dark, like depths, but also like some of the most amazing things as well. And like you sort of teeter in between the two of those, which is an interesting thing for me. But yeah.
Yeah, when I look at this piece, I mean, I think flesh, I think meat, I think body, I mean, there's a beauty to it. There's also a grotesqueness to it. There's a, it's to David's question earlier about scale. It's difficult to tell if this is, if this is, huge or if it's small, but nonetheless, you know that it's dimensional and sculptural. It's also difficult to tell whether this is an object that's wrapped in something, or if it's something in and of itself. There's a lot of mystery. But I see that that's almost like science fiction, and it almost looks like it's dissected as well. There's a lot, there's a lot going on with this work. Let's, in the interest of time, let's advance to the next, and so we can definitely cover everything that we want to share.
Oh, yeah. So this one and the next one are pretty much the same thing. And so I guess we can kind of even go to the next one if we want, but it's up to you. But I will say that these are they're about the same size as the ones that are in the show. This one's a little smaller, but they're around 3 feet by 4 or 5 feet, right? And so I wanted to keep them in relation to the body. So the first piece, the moment of rest piece, which is 15 feet, I intentionally wanted that image of a Black figure to take up a lot of space, but I wanted this to sort of, at least with this iteration of these pieces, I wanted them to have a particular relationship with the body. So when you stand in front of it, there's more of an interaction to it. Like they're not flat, they're coming out at you. It is fleshy, but it's also not, and I have rusted nails sort of in there as well. And so, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like for me, at least, there's always this flood of emotion, like, and you're going back and forth between delight and horror. And And I feel like that's actually most human experience. It's not all good or all bad. And then there's so much conversation on how to represent Black culture and who we are, right? And I feel that I tend to sort of err towards truth, and our experience is complicated, like all experiences. And I think it's more of a challenge for me as an artist to try to encapsulate that rather than to just talk about the bad, or just to sort of only talk about things that are, you know, prosperous and good. I think it's more interesting to try to like get at that area where it's a little bit of both and nothing at all.
Well, Dexter, I saw from a curatorial standpoint, when I first saw Antoine's work, it immediately reminded me in a sense of like Sam Gilliam, like how he takes, you know, huge pieces of cloth, but he's treated them with color and paint, and then hanging them and draping them in a certain way to create effect and treatment of space. But Antoine's was like a whole different take on it, right? It wasn't hackneyed, it wasn't derivative of Sam Gilliam, or maybe even like an understudy of his, Kevin Cole. Like it stood on its own. It was a whole different process, like how he takes the actual medium and uses that as the canvas, towards a lot of the other, at least two-dimensional pieces in the show are kind of in the confines of your traditional, you know, square or rectangle of a, you know, actual painting or some type of flat 2D treatment. So just my kind of curatorial thinking back to when I first saw his work, like going through these slides now, it kind of took me back to my first impressions of Antoine's work.
You know what it is? I'm a Jack Whitten stan. I love Jack Whitten. I'll be the first to say I mean, there would not be me if there wasn't Jack Whitten. And I love the way he you got a book? You got a okay. Oh, that's a sculpture. I don't have that one. Yeah. When he was he in Rome? I think. Greece.
Yeah. I mean, Jack Whitten is a titan, you know. I saw his show at Met Brewer, I think it was maybe 5 years ago or something like that. I mean, I still think about that show on a regular basis.
No, like I think he's so severely underappreciated because what he did for painting in terms of just mark making, he was like, look, everybody was like doing de Kooning. And so I literally had to like create a tool to make a piece so I wouldn't be de Kooning. And he was doing this like he was working with acrylic, like way early. He was doing all this amazing stuff. And I think, you know, he was showing and everything, but I just feel like his contribution to painting in the arts, I think towards the end of his career, he started to get that recognition. But I mean, if you go back and look at the stuff he was doing back in the like, you know, 60s and stuff, is just brilliant. And so I just spent the summer just sort of consuming as much of his work as I could, and it's less the finished pieces. I mean, I love those, but it's how he talks about just the process of him being in the studio, trying to figure, like he becomes like a scientist and he's just figuring out stuff. And I was like, okay. And like, I'm reading his book and then I'm going and, you know, playing with his materials and things are falling apart and not working and going back to it and all of that. But so it's just like a lot of Jack Whitten, and when I'm painting, he's there.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Let's advance to the next image.
Yeah, so I also do collage. So yeah, this is a good this is what I was talking about in terms of like playing with the sanding and playing with the surface. But these pieces are small. They're like 9 by 12. And they're from the title of the series is There Would Be No Miracles Here, and it's an iteration of small collages I do maybe every year or so, and I did about 20 of them. They're actually on view at the Nasher that opens in like 2 days. But like I did these last year at a residency, and it's just sort of me looking back at, these are all images from the Depression era, the Farm Security Council, I think that's the name of it, like went out and took all these photos of rural Black folks in their daily lives. And so I'm sort of drawing parallel to that and sort of working class Black folks during COVID. A lot of the, when COVID first hit, you had a lot of, what were they called?
Non-essential.
Essential workers. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of the essential workers, right, ended up being like Black and Latinx people, right? And so kind of looking at that, like sort of drawing parallels or just looking at sort of, like that reality of sort of, I mean, we're talking about race, but really like this sort of like class divide that tends to happen in there. But yeah.
Let's advance to the next image.
Yeah, so this is very similar to what I have in the show. This one is just a lot larger. I think this was at that time. Well, yeah, it's still probably the largest one I made at the moment. And just me, again, playing around with material, trying to play with scale. So having this piece that's like 8 feet, but then having these really small, intricate pieces. I probably should have posted a detail of it, but sort of in the top there, you see these really small like pieces that have a lot of detail in them. And again,
what are those?
Say what?
What are those?
So they're gel medium as well. And so I'll sand paper. I'll take a collage, sand it, and then I'll do a gel transfer of it into skin. And so the image is actually encapsulated in skin. And then I cut those up and I collage with them. And so they've been sort of deconstructed and reassembled on this. But again, I mean, David mentioned Sam Gilliam, right? Just playing with scale and seeing how that works.
Is there any significance to the colors that you choose in your work, or is that just based upon the feeling you have at the moment?
It comes and goes. I think with like before, it didn't necessarily have as much of a significance, but I do think that I was using these bright colors, especially in the more bodily pieces, to think about sort of that in between, sort of this brilliance of Black culture, so to speak. And so I was thinking of these really bright colors. Yeah, this piece is something completely different. I got a chance to do a residency at the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, and they're so cool because they let me do all sorts of weird stuff. And I love narrative, and so I wanted to tell a collaborative narrative, and I wanted to do historical fiction and speculative fiction as well. And so just really quickly, it's based off of, it's historical fiction. It's called Black Fusion Society, and it's based off of the Wilmington Massacre that actually happened. But it sort of takes these women from there, and they leave and they go create their own secret society in a small town in North Carolina. And they are working, and they create their own belief system, and they're working to sort of do interdimensional travel so they can live in a world that doesn't have white supremacy, but we can't imagine what that is. And so they create their own set of deities, and this is one of the deities, and it's the mythic being of equity, right? And so I have all of these different types of images that create this this sort of catalog of deities. And so I'm telling the story through different media. I actually have an hour-long piece where I had friends to write and perform stories. I have images, I have text, and this is sort of an ongoing project. Next, I want to do some augmented reality pieces, but this is just one piece that I did early on during the summer under a bridge while trying not to get caught taking this photo by myself. This was during COVID, so I couldn't call anyone to come over and like help me take the photo, so I had to do it all by myself. And yeah, that was wild.
Well, so much of it is problem solving, right? I mean, I think it's creative problem solving. I don't know if we have another image or if this is the final. Let's see. If there isn't another one, we'll stop the slideshow for now. And yeah, and so we're down to I guess the final quarter of our conversation, and I know that we want to spend some time seeing some of the work that you have in your space. So, why don't we switch gears a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about like your life as an artist. You teach, you're an artist, you show commercially, you do projects that are not commercial projects. How do you balance all that? I mean, so for an artist that is, listening to our conversation, who might be maybe younger than you, that's just trying to figure out the path forward. I'm not so much looking for advice for them, but can you kind of talk about what does it mean? What does it mean to be an artist and also doing all of these other things?
I think you get to decide what it means to be an artist, right? I think oftentimes, especially if you went through the mill of undergrad, grad school, art schools, right? And you sort of listen to sort of the canon, right? There is an ideal of an artist. I feel that, especially given like socioeconomic like realities, those aren't or haven't been for a while, right? As realistic. And I think it's up, you get to define how you want to do this, right? And so I think for me, teaching right now, like allows me to go out and go under a bridge and put on a stocking cap. Like it allows me to do that, right? Given like my reality and and what's going on. So so that's why I teach. And during the semester, I do research and I do smaller work, but during the summer is when I apply to a lot of stuff, and hope that's the times when I normally do larger projects, right? When I can travel a lot more. And that's my reality right now. So maybe in 5 years, given, whatever plan I have, that might shift. But I feel it's really important to assess your, where you are, assess the resources you have, assess the people around you, and then you make plans from that and you move. And also, look at what other people are doing. There are really great models of, artists who are doing it, that traditional way, but there's also artists who aren't. And I feel that you just make it work for you. And also don't be afraid to ask people for advice. None of us know everything. And I tell students all the time, ask people, like, the worst they can say is no, then you just ask somebody else. But,
Yeah, David, you wanna chime in on that? So similar question.
Yeah, that's to be I think an independent artist, you can wear multiple hats, right? You can take different paths. Antoine hit it on the head. I recall back to my undergrad days at Hampton. Most of my professors were also practicing professional studio artists, so they were doing group shows, solo shows, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. Some were from, the Caribbean, some were from Africa. So, that was inspirational to be able to see that and say, okay, I chose the right major. There's actually something out here. Now, if I don't want to go to grad school and get that MFA, which, makes a shorter path to teaching, what's my plan going to be? So Antoine hit it on the head. Be able to find something that works for you. You got to be honest with what your actual station is in life. Be honest with what you feel like you can achieve and not try to like bite off too much maybe at once. Kind of break your plan down into 1 to 3 years instead of trying to say this is what I'm going to do and it's going to be a lifetime achievement. Be honest and just kind of work it as you can go, and be authentic and be persistent. Asking questions too, that's a key thing. Don't ever be afraid to ask a question, because you never know, somebody might have the answer. If they don't, they can put you in touch with somebody else. But I think people always admire you as an artist who want to climb higher and, achieve new heights and not keep your work stuck in one station. So I love it. I love what he's doing. And I think it's a great inspiration to have that presence in the show too, to show young artists, show parents who have young creative talent with them, like, hey, most of these artists in here, they do two things. They might teach but they still have show that ends up here in this local setting on a grand scale. The Gant's a really beautiful platform, a large audience, a high profile platform, not just for the city of Charlotte, but regionally throughout the nation and even around the world. So it's great to have an artist of his ilk presence in the show, and also during these type of open air talks where, people can get a little bit deeper insight into his process and how he works and just how he's kind of come to where he is right now.
Thank you for that. I'm often asked about just sort of like this moment in time that we're in right now, as far as like Black art is concerned, commercially, and even I guess to some degree you could even say academically, but commercially, obviously there's a lot of commercial interest in artists of color, but I think it's playing itself out in the same ways that capitalism tends to play itself out. Like there are people who end up, I wouldn't say winners and losers, but there ends up being certain people who seem to get the bulk of the attention. And then there's this whole sea of other artists that are like, yeah, there's all this interest, but there's also all of these artists that are not getting attention, right? And so that's another reason why, I curate, right? Because I feel like rather than being frustrated about that, if I see artists that I think are doing work that's compelling, I want to give them a platform to have the work be seen. Because I don't want to wait for somebody else to do it. I mean, most of my curatorial work is just me being a really impatient person. and just like, and also having this sort of, I guess to some degree, like almost naive belief in my own ideas, right? but that's what is required, right? In order to like make something happen, right? To have that, we have a question that's come in, and oh, this is a good one. What effect have artist residencies had on your career and work? So I guess both of you, you've participated in residencies in some capacity. Because maybe Antoine, you could talk about that. How residencies affected you as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, residencies have been really great for me. Again, based on sort of my life and everything. So they allow a few things. One, they allow me, depending on the type of residency, right? I can go here and just sort of focus, and it's time and space to work. I mean, there's different types of residencies, but those tend to be my favorite, where I can just sort of focus and all that. But also, I mean, you get to meet other artists, you get to meet other people, you get to see how people whom you may have not met before or would have never met, you get to see how they're working. And especially if you go to a residency in another city, right? It's a chance to explore, but it can also be this, it can be this really external like experience where you're interacting with people, you're building relationships, which can be awesome. Some of my best art friends are people I met during residencies, but then also it can be a time where you just sort of get to stop. And I don't think all residencies, I don't think you have to like have something made, but just getting the time to sit and look at a piece and just think, I mean, that's so valuable. And I feel like I've benefited greatly. I think either during or after residencies is when I've done some of my best, I don't say best, but some of my more interesting work, at least for me.
Right. It gave you a moment to pause, right? So you're coming to the work with more clarity. And also it's kind of connected to the question. And David, I also want to hear your answer to the question, but it's something I've often, asked artists about and recommend. I think a lot of artists, particularly those who have this like demand for their work with collectors, where people like literally like at the door going, you got something? You got something? It's like, I think it's beneficial to spend time with your work. I mean, I know quite a few artists that will make a work and within days it's gone.
Right.
And while I can get, I understand we all got to make a living, so it's not even about that. It's not about the economic reasons for selling the work. It's about spending time with your work, because I think that it's helpful to look at something for longer periods of time to sort of understand what it is you actually did there. You're like, rather than being more like a factory where something's made and then it's gone, and it's, and the next time you see it, it's in a show maybe 2 years later, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember doing that, sort of. So David, so what about you in residencies?
Residencies have been, my experience with them has been, it allows me to scratch 2 itches. I love teaching, but I don't have the credentials to get an actual job teaching. I have an MFA, but I've been fortunate enough to receive a lot of invitations to come and serve in a teaching capacity, like work on either weekend workshops in mural making, or, talk about Black art history, maybe during, February. So public school systems or private school systems would invite me in to do residencies in that aspect, and then maybe do a project the following week with the students to kind of just show how the historical side, turns into the applied side. So they're great. The ones that I've done, the only one that I've done that's more of just like a solo residency at the McCall Center in 2011, I believe, 2010, was interesting in the sense that it came off the heels of my first large public art commission for Divergent Threads, Lucid Memories on the exterior of the Gantt. So I had a connection with the city of Charlotte already, and I kind of loved that budding connection with, folks in our community. I established a relationship with working on the Gantt project, and then that carried over into the McCall Center, and then being able to meet all the wonderful people on the arts admin and programming side gave me some experience too, right? Like my next residency where I'm asked to come in and teach, I learned some organizational aspects from those who worked on the support side and the organizational side. But then it gave me that time, like Antoine said, to just be in a studio. I had a key. I could go in 24 hours a day. They put us up in a, studio space or a living space right across the street from the McCall. So all I had to do was like walk back and forth. If I wasn't inspired to be in there at 10 in the morning, maybe I just wanted to read a book or, have a cup of coffee and just explore Charlotte, and then come in at 7 and work until 3 in the morning. I had that ability for, the summer. I did a summer residency at the McCall. So residencies are great. And I think there's some artists during that residency at the McCall, that's all they do year round. There was an artist from Vietnam. That's all she does. She goes from residency to residency to residency. She might spend a few weeks back at home in Vietnam with her mom, and then she's back off to the next residency. So for some artists, they love that aspect of new environments and new people because it fuels their work in such a dramatic way.
Yeah,
so
there's so many.
Them.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I mean, there's so many different ways to have a career and a life as an artist, and and I've seen it so many different ways. I know artists who never had a commercial gallery, yet we've all heard of them, and you're like, how is that possible? Well, all they spent was all their time working with institutions. Like they never really, it was never their goal to be represented by a gallery per se. It was always about like just being in the public sphere as much as possible. And that kind of leads to this question that's come in, like, how do you both relate to your work when it's in the public space versus being in a gallery? I mean, how's that experience different for you, Antoine? And what are you looking to get out of putting your work out into a public space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I make the work, right? Like, it's like, this is what I've been going through. Here's the work. The interesting thing about it being in a public space is I'm interested in the reaction, not in necessarily do people get it, but I love that people sort of bring their own baggage to a piece. And when it's in the public, you get to sort of see that, and you get to see that reaction and how people respond to a 15-foot like black dude, or something that's tactile, right? And like, how do you relate to that? And that to me is almost just as fulfilling as the making process, right? I mean, and that, so when it's in public, that's when it shifts for me. When it's in a like private, and I guess we're saying galleries or like a private space, that has its own set of things. But when it's in that public space, yeah, it has a different life, especially public outside too. It just has a different life because it's not as it's not corded off, right? Like anyone can approach it, right? And so much of like the way, at least again, you go through that through the art mill, like so much of what you make is like, it's to be in a gallery in this space, and there's a guard that's probably underpaid and to look after it and all of that. Whereas when it's outside, it's like sort of like, yeah, whatever people think about it is what people think about it. And for me, I love that. I love if someone's like, yeah, B, this ain't it. And like that to me is just as valuable as the person that sends me the like DM talking about how much they love the work. So I don't know. There's something about that that's really interesting.
Yeah. And what about you, David?
No, you hit it on the head. Having it outside the traditional confines of four walls in a gallery space definitely has more of an impact And that's where I've always wanted to take my art. You know, my first mural was in high school for a little restaurant, a little Italian restaurant. They wanted the name of their business spray painted, you know, on the side of this brick building. So after I did that, there were so many people who would approach my parents and say, "Oh, I saw what your son did on the side of that building. I love it." And, you know, not so much as the aspect of the adoration for me, that never really was my thing. Like, maybe I hit a small point after college where I had this extreme push to want to be, you know, recognized as an artist. But for the most part, I've always just enjoyed making art. And then I've also kind of always been really business minded. So I love the kind of exchange of something for what I created, right? Be it a book cover for a student in elementary school or in junior high, middle school. I had the Badger Minute machine. I was making, you know, these collages of Michael Jackson and Madonna and Boy George, selling those. I had my little money after school. I could get me a slice of pizza, play Donkey Kong and Space Invader. So, I mean, I was the man. I didn't have to ask my mom for any money. So I love that. So that's always carried. In Hampton, I was designing blue jean jackets and painting on jeans for people, doing portraits for people that worked in the admin department that knew I was an artist. So I've always kind of been enterprising at the same time, but I love the aspect of the public that it creates these conversations, you know, that you might have never had if it was tucked away inside of a gallery space. People, you know, can either question internally, start to maybe examine their perspectives on a certain thing, place, or being by seeing the art out in the public space. And then, you know, through technology that can be shared or that can be brought into the office or into the next place where that person that individually took it and they can share it with that next person they come in contact with. So I love the public aspect of it because it just opens up the door for art to be more of a driver for hopefully change in some type of aspect, again, on the individual level, because that's where it all starts. And then collectively it can kind of build and gain more momentum that way.
Thank you for sharing that. So we're down to the final like 5 or so minutes. Antoine, I know you're in your space, so maybe you can just take a moment and just kind of like show us a couple of pieces that you have there that are maybe either they're completed or they're in progress. I'd just kind of love to give people a bit of a sense of like being in your studio.
Yeah, sure. Everything here I'm gonna show you is completed. I have some incomplete stuff. I'm working on some sound pieces, so they're not that interesting to look at. So I wanted to sort of talk about the process of the wheat paste. So the piece that I showed earlier, that Othered Sons, and I talked about the process. So this is sort of how it starts out, right? Or well, it starts out as a horrible sketch, but then after some photo shoots, you can see that, yeah. And so I do an ink on, this is vellum. So I do an ink on vellum drawing. And so these are all of the drawings from that. And I just absolutely love drawing on vellum. I love working with ink. It's very different than how I normally work with collage, because collage is very forgiving for me, whereas this isn't. And so I have to really be thinking about values, proportions, and just really plan things out in advance. And so yeah, like pieces like that. And so, yeah, so from this, I'll take it and blow it up really large. And so I love to draw. And so like I'll draw. So I have this image, like it's in my sketchbook, and I'll go and do photocopies of it. And then I'll take it and where is it? And then I'll I have like a bunch of paper just sort of hanging around, and I'll gesso and sand the paper, and then I'll do a gel transfer and then draw back into it. I don't have that particular drawing. It's somewhere around here. But so these are things that I do. They're small, like this is a small space that I'm in. And so I do stuff like that. But thinking of collage, here are some more images from the collage that I was doing. I was taking some of the images from the Scarborough Center and talk about science fiction. I don't know if y'all can see these. So these are images from the Farm Bureau. And so I took them and then, you know, thinking of science fiction, like, you know.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Again, like playing with this imagery, sort of reappropriating it.
And that's like a watercolor paper, right, Antoine? Like a Reeves or?
Yeah, no, this is watercolor paper that's been gessoed like crazy because I'm sanding on it, so it has to be really thick to stand up to it. So it's really thick, a heavyweight paper. And so yeah, so these are just some I did this summer playing around. I might continue this. I don't know. Dexter, I really love what you said about having to live with the work, because I don't think this is the final iteration of this. It could be, but it needs to sit here for a little bit before I can figure out what's going on with that. But talking about sort of the sanding sort of got me to this. So these are the acrylic skins. It's kind of cold in here. Well, this is by the window, so it's pretty tough. But yeah, I was just in here just kind of playing around with gel medium and yeah, just seeing like how does this work, you know, like this one actually painted on and I'm like, oh, that's trash. So like then I started mixing the paint with the gel medium, and just a lot of just sort of being in here or being in a space and playing around and working. And so what I want to start doing actually is I want to, with these drawings, not these drawings specifically, but start making some drawings and see if I can sort of embed them into the process. And so within this, you'll start seeing drawn organic forms. So I could use ink, but I'm wondering if I maybe even use sort of like graphite powder. I don't know. So I want to play around with like this and graphite. And so I've been working with so looking at what's called science fiction economies, where it's economists, they look at economies that take place within science fiction literature, movies, and television shows, and they try to like glean like, well, what are these fictional economies and how can they benefit real life economy? And that's been interesting. I've been really interested in that, and so I've been sort of working with sound pieces and sort of this materiality. I don't know what it's going to be, but you know, that's sort of the fun of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. So we have one final question that's come in before we end today's discussion, David. So someone asked, what advice do you have for an aspiring muralist?
Seek out as many opportunities as you can. If you have a bunch of ideas that you think would be great in your kind of local surroundings, you kind of walk and say, okay, this wall would be beautiful for a mural. Find out who owns that space. If you have an idea for it, fine, take that in and just do kind of a straight cold call approach. Maybe email someone or walk directly in and see if you can speak to whoever the key person is that will give you a green light to maybe paint that on there. Now, if you reach a point where that person says, yeah, you can use the space, but we can't fund it, you're going to have to be adept into working to get, funding, so don't be reliant just on RFQs to give you opportunities. There's probably plenty of local places, indoor and outdoor. I painted plenty of murals inside of nightclubs and barbershops. So wherever there's a flat wall, there's a canvas. Keep your ideas fresh. Study more muralists, not just maybe the ones try to go outside the box and see how people are maybe taking the aspect of what it means to make a mural and turning it on top of its head. You don't have to always paint traditionally on the surface either. You can design something and then use a vinyl wall laminated mural to have a sign shop printed out and then come up and install it too. So don't stay inside the box, just think of as many ways you can take being a mural artist and make it work for you, and don't be afraid to give that a shot and try it.
Well, thanks for that. Thank you both. Antoine, I want to thank you for everything you shared today, your generosity, your art making life, career, your process, allowing us into your space, however, virtually. David, thank you and Stephen for curating a fantastic exhibition at the Gantt Center. As I said at the top of this discussion, that show closes next week. So, be there or be square. You got 7 more days, to get out there and see the show. So we're at our final words now. And you guys can hang out or sign off, up to you. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We hope you were inspired and motivated by the journey and backgrounds of the artists Antoine Williams and David Wilson. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and further develop programs like Open Air. To learn more about the ways you can support the Gantt Center, please visit their website, ganttcenter.org/donate. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button below the screen to be updated on all future virtual programs. The Visual Vanguard exhibition will be on view at the Gantt Center through MLK Day on January 17th. Please take the time to take in the works of Antoine and the other artists in the show, particularly during the Gantt Center's MLK Day celebration. Visit their website for more information. I want to thank everyone again for joining us. I hope everyone stays safe. I know these are wild times that we're living in, and I look forward to seeing everyone in person as soon as possible. Good night.
Thank you.